One night the sky forgot to sleep. It started quietly, too quietly for anyone to notice. In the early hours of a spring morning, the stars above South America seemed a little brighter, a little closer. Astronomers thought it was a passing reflection, maybe space junk catching sunlight. But then in places half a world away, in small fishing towns in Japan, in the deserts of Africa, in the icy fields of Norway, people were seeing the same thing. Tiny points of light began moving across the sky in perfect lines, slow and steady, like beads on invisible strings. They didn't blink or fade like satellites. They glided, hundreds of them, arranged as if following an unseen hand. At first, people just watched. Some took out their phones, recording shaky videos. Others stood in silence, wondering if it was another one of those strange experiments that governments like to keep secret. A few even clapped, thinking it was a new kind of fireworks. The next morning, social media overflowed with clips. "Mysterious lights seen all over the world," read one headline. Another said alien fleet or human trick. By noon, scientists had confirmed what most already suspected. These weren't natural lights. They were organized, coordinated, intelligent. At an observatory high in Chile's Atacama Desert, telescopes locked onto the moving points. They weren't satellites or meteors. They were enormous, so big that even at great distances their outlines could be measured. They reflected sunlight like polished metal, moving slowly enough to suggest control. The world waited for panic. It never came. People had learned too much about fear. In the years before, they had seen pandemics, wars, floods, strange weather. Humanity had already been stretched thin by uncertainty. So when something truly extraordinary appeared above them, something that should have broken their understanding of the universe, people didn't scream. They stared. They whispered. And then somehow they smiled. A man in a crowded city stopped on his way to work and pointed up. Beside him, a woman selling flowers looked too. For a moment, the noise of cars and trains and phones faded. The two of them, strangers, just watched the sky together. In a small village, children ran outside barefoot to see the lights. One of them asked, "Are they coming to visit us?" The adults laughed softly, unsure of what to say. Television stations played the same footage again and again, bright shapes moving in formation above the clouds. Some experts warned not to jump to conclusions, that this could still be a human project or a trick of light. But the truth was too big to hide. Something or someone had arrived. Within 24 hours, the formations grew larger. They stretched across the night sky like slow-moving constellations. Air traffic controllers confirmed that the objects were far above the height of planes, too high to be human-made aircraft. Space agencies released images showing hundreds of massive structures entering Earth's orbit, each one shaped like a blade of silver. And yet, the world did not burn in fear. Instead, people gathered in parks and rooftops to watch. Families brought blankets, snacks, and small radios. It felt less like invasion, more like a strange new festival. There were jokes about space tourists, memes about the galaxy's best Wi-Fi, and even music videos inspired by the lights. But underneath the humor, something deeper stirred, a quiet recognition that life had just changed forever. News anchors spoke in softer voices than usual. Scientists, usually cautious with words, struggled to describe what they were seeing. One of them said on live television, "It's the most peaceful arrival I could imagine. No explosions, no demands, just presence." For 3 nights, the lights grew brighter. They seemed to form patterns, rings, triangles, spirals, spreading slowly across the atmosphere. In some places, faint hums were heard, low and steady, like distant thunder that never faded. Birds flew strangely during those nights, sometimes gathering beneath the moving shapes as if drawn to their quiet energy. People stayed awake longer. The world became a little quieter, as if waiting for the sky to speak, and then it did. At 3:17 a.m. GMT, every radio frequency on Earth caught a faint signal. It wasn't a voice, not words, just a sound, rhythmic and mathematical. It pulsed in perfect intervals, 3 beats, then 5, then 8, a sequence known in mathematics as the Fibonacci pattern, common in nature but not in random noise. It played for exactly 13 minutes, then stopped. Scientists called it the broadcast. Governments held emergency meetings. Satellites were re-aimed. Translation programs were fed the signal, trying to find meaning. Yet ordinary people lying on rooftops or sitting in cars parked under the open sky didn't need an explanation. They knew the feeling of being spoken to even without words. Something was out there, watching, waiting, not attacking, not demanding, just announcing itself. In small ways, the world began to shift. Traffic slowed in some cities as drivers stopped to look up. In others, religious gatherings formed spontaneously, people holding candles and praying not in fear but in awe. Artists began sketching the glowing patterns. Musicians remixed the signal into songs. Even those who didn't believe in anything larger than themselves felt, for a fleeting moment, that humanity was part of something vast and unseen. There were, of course, voices of worry. Military officials warned of hidden dangers. Economists predicted chaos if the visitors interfered with satellites. Conspiracy theorists claimed it was a fake made by secret programs. But none of those warnings stopped people from looking up. The lights didn't leave. They stayed, silent, constant, patient. On the seventh day, the formations changed again. They gathered into a single, perfect circle above the Pacific Ocean, visible from both Americas and Asia. Within the circle, the stars themselves seemed to dim, as if shadowed by something enormous. Astronomers calculated that the fleet stretched hundreds of kilometers across. No technology on Earth could have built or moved such structures. The evidence was final, they weren't ours. Still, there was no attack, no demand for surrender, no destruction. The ships simply hovered, silent guardians over a world holding its breath. In the following days, the mood around the globe transformed from curiosity to calm acceptance. People went back to work. Children went back to school. The extraordinary had become part of ordinary life. In the background of daily routines, those quiet lights floated like a constant reminder that something greater had noticed humanity and decided, for reasons unknown, to simply watch. Journalists began calling it the gentle invasion, though it felt nothing like an invasion. Farmers still harvested crops. City dwellers still fought traffic. Life moved forward as it always did, though now, every once in a while, someone would pause mid-conversation, look up and smile. At one university, a young student said to her teacher, "Maybe they're waiting for us to say hello first." And perhaps she was right. That night, people from every continent turned their eyes skyward once more. The air felt different, thicker, charged with the hum of unseen energy. The sky was no longer something distant. It had become alive, awake, aware. Across the world, observatories stayed open all night. In dark control rooms, astronomers whispered to each other like children hiding secrets. They knew what this moment meant. Humanity was no longer alone. But out on the streets in small towns and giant cities, people weren't thinking about cosmic history or science. They were thinking about simple things. The warmth of another hand beside them, the sound of laughter carried on the wind, the comfort of knowing that even under an unfamiliar sky, life still went on. In that sense, nothing had changed. And yet everything had. The sky didn't sleep that night, and neither did the world. For the first time in history, every person on Earth shared the same thought. We are not the only ones. But instead of fear, what they felt was peace. It was as if the stars themselves had come closer not to threaten, but to remind humankind of something it had long forgotten, that curiosity could be stronger than fear, that wonder could still exist after centuries of doubt. And so, as dawn began to rise over the glowing ships, painting them in gold and pink, a quiet smile spread across the planet. The Galactic fleet had arrived, and mankind, tired, brave, endlessly curious mankind, just smiled. The signal came again, not from Earth, not from any known satellite, but from somewhere high above the clouds, where the silver shapes floated silently, still motionless after weeks. People had almost grown used to them. The world had found its balance between fear and fascination. News channels were calmer now. Children pointed at the sky without worry. The lights had become part of the view, like distant moons. Then, one night, the quiet was broken. It began just after midnight in a mountain town. A few people listening to a late-night radio show heard a strange tone slip through the speakers. Soft, mechanical, but somehow beautiful. It lasted only a few seconds, like a whisper between songs. Moments later, the same sound appeared on another station, then another, until every radio frequency on the planet carried it. It wasn't loud or harsh. It was rhythmic, almost like breathing, 3 short pulses, a pause, then 5, another pause, then 8. The same pattern repeated again and again, calm and steady, like a heart trying to speak in numbers. Scientists were the first to recognize the sequence. It was mathematical, a Fibonacci pattern found in seashells, sunflowers, galaxies. A code of nature itself. That was how people knew. Whoever sent it understood life. Within minutes, the entire world was listening. Drivers stopped their cars in the middle of roads. Factory workers turned off their machines. In hospitals, even the patients asked the nurses to leave the radios on. Planes flying across the night sky picked up the signal too, passengers staring out their windows as the sound filled their headphones. It lasted exactly 13 minutes. Then it ended. At first, people clapped, laughed, or cried without knowing why. The sound had touched something deep inside, something older than fear. It was the feeling of being called, not by words, but by understanding. The next morning, every government held an emergency meeting. Scientists were interviewed live on TV. Some said it was a greeting. Others said it was a kind of measurement, a way for the visitors to test human communication. But ordinary people didn't wait for official answers. They began to talk to the sky on their own. In open fields, people played music upward, hoping to be heard. In cities, groups stood on rooftops with speakers, sending out patterns of light. A few amateur astronomers even tried to respond using old radio telescopes, sending simple mathematical replies back into the clouds. For the first time in centuries, the world was not divided by language, belief, or borders. Everyone was listening to the same sound. The media named it the broadcast. Some called it the greeting. Others called it the invitation. Whatever it was, it became a turning point. Humanity had always wondered if it was alone. Now it had an answer. Days passed, but no new signal came. The ships remained where they were, silent, silver shadows above the world. Scientists continued decoding the patterns, trying to find hidden layers. Some claimed there was a message inside the pauses, a code that spoke of distance and direction. Others said the entire thing was emotional, not logical, a kind of universal language meant to awaken curiosity, not fear. But the most surprising thing wasn't in the laboratories or the government offices. It was in the streets. Something subtle began to change in people. They smiled more. They argued less. In cafes, strangers talked about the ships like old friends. "Do you think they're like us?" someone would ask. And the answer almost always was, maybe better. Children began drawing the ships everywhere, on paper, on sidewalks, on classroom walls. Teachers didn't stop them. They encouraged it. In the drawings, the ships often had eyes or wings glowing softly over peaceful cities. Artists painted them. Musicians made songs from the signal, turning those strange beats into melodies. There were street performances, dances, even lullabies based on the rhythm. The broadcast became part of human culture in just a few days. But behind the joy, there was also confusion. Governments didn't know how to respond. Should they speak back? Should they stay quiet? Should they prepare for something more? Intelligence agencies tried to trace the origin of the sound, but it didn't come from any one ship. It came from all of them, as if the fleet had become one enormous voice. And then there were the dreams. Around the world, people began reporting strange, vivid dreams. They weren't frightening, just strange. In these dreams, people stood beneath bright skies filled with light, hearing soft tones like those from the broadcast. Some dreamed of water, some of vast empty plains, others of floating above Earth, weightless and calm. Scientists said it was coincidence, a result of stress and constant media coverage. But others believed something deeper was happening, that the signal had touched the human mind in ways no one understood. In one town, a group of people gathered on a hilltop every night, waiting for the sound to return. They didn't bring weapons or machines, only candles and instruments. They believed the visitors were peaceful, explorers, maybe teachers. And in the silence they played music, hoping the ships would hear and reply. Sometimes faint lights flickered above them, as if answering. The news spread fast. Videos showed the glowing ships shimmering when people played music below. Some said it was coincidence, reflections of city light. Others said it was connection. Either way, hope began to bloom. Then something unexpected happened. A new signal arrived. Not through sound this time, but through light. Over the Pacific Ocean, one of the ships sent a pulse downward, a beam so faint it looked like moonlight. It wasn't a weapon. It didn't destroy anything. It simply shimmered across the clouds, changing colors in blue, green, white, gold, each shift following the same rhythm as the broadcast. People watching from islands and coasts gasped. It was communication through beauty. The light show lasted only minutes, but it was enough to prove that the visitors were aware of being seen. A message without words. We see you too. The world stopped again, holding its breath. In the days that followed, humanity's curiosity turned into wonder. The ships, once symbols of mystery, became symbols of peace. Tourists traveled thousands of miles just to stand under the skies where the ships hovered. Couples proposed under the lights. Entire cities turned off their street lamps at night so everyone could watch the silent glow together. Economists called it the pause effect. Productivity dropped, but no one cared. People wanted to feel, to watch, to remember that they were living in a time when the universe had finally spoken. Of course, not everyone trusted it. Some feared it was a trick. Others warned of hidden danger, an observation before invasion. But those voices grew smaller each day. The visitors did nothing aggressive, nothing demanding. Their patience itself became proof of peace. Television anchors no longer spoke with tension. They spoke with awe. Maybe, one of them said during a live broadcast. They're waiting for us to change before they speak again. And maybe that was true. Because slowly, without anyone commanding it, humanity did begin to change. Crime rates fell in some places. Acts of kindness increased. People felt connected, not just to the visitors but to each other. The realization that someone was watching, that something greater was aware of humanity, made people behave as if they were being seen for who they truly were. Even the smallest things carried meaning now. A handshake, a smile, a child's laughter. Everything felt like part of the same story. Weeks passed. No new messages came. The ship stayed quiet, steady, like stars frozen in place. Scientists continued their work, scanning, listening. The public waited patiently. And somewhere, deep in every human heart, a question began to grow. What if the broadcast wasn't just a message? What if it was an invitation? Not for contact, but for reflection. What if the visitors had come not to study humanity, but to remind it of something it had forgotten? The power of peace, patience, and unity. Whatever the truth was, the world would never be the same again. The broadcast had changed everything, not through war, not through fear, but through the simplest sound ever heard, a pattern of numbers that spoke to the soul. As the sun set on the 30th day since the broadcast, people looked up again. The ship shimmered faintly in the twilight. Somewhere in that great silence, hope lingered, soft, steady, and alive. No one knew if the visitors would speak again. But maybe, just maybe, humanity had already received the most important message of all, a reminder that peace could arrive not with thunder, but with a whisper. The world had been waiting for something to happen. Days had passed since the strange signal, the broadcast. And though the skies remained filled with silver shapes, they had done nothing more. No messages, no lights, no sound, just quiet. People began to wonder if that was all there would be. Maybe the ships had finished whatever they came for. Maybe they were only passing by. But then one morning something changed. The first to notice were pilots flying over the Atlantic Ocean. At sunrise, the sky ahead of them shimmered like a mirror. It wasn't a cloud, but something metallic reflecting the golden light. As they flew closer, the reflection curved and moved, stretching across the horizon. It was one of the ships, huge, smooth, and silent, descending lower than any of the others had before. Within hours, cameras everywhere turned upward. The fleets that had been far above the atmosphere now moved closer to Earth. They didn't rush. They floated slowly, gracefully, like enormous whales gliding through the sky. From far below, they looked almost gentle. They came in daylight without fear or hiding. People flooded into the streets to watch. Cars stopped in the middle of highways. Offices emptied. Schools let students out early so they could see. For the first time in human history, something from beyond the stars was truly visible with the naked eye. The ships were breathtaking. Their surfaces weren't hard metal like in movies. They looked soft, like liquid glass that shifted colors under the sunlight. Silver, blue, gold. then back to silver again. They made no sound, not even the rush of wind. The air beneath them didn't tremble. Birds flew nearby, unafraid. And then something extraordinary happened. In dozens of cities, people noticed that the ships stopped moving once they reached a certain point in the sky. One hovered above the Pacific Ocean, another above the Sahara Desert, one over India, another above New York, and several more across Asia, Africa, and Europe. They weren't random. Each one seemed to position itself above the world's major regions, as if marking balance, as if ensuring everyone could see. The strange thing was that no one panicked. It was as if the calmness of the ships had somehow spread to the people below. Instead of chaos, there was silence, not from fear, but from wonder. Children pointed and laughed. Old men wiped tears from their eyes. Families stood together on rooftops. Even soldiers assigned to watch the skies lowered their weapons, unable to find any reason to use them. For the first time, the entire human race was united in one feeling: awe. News channels broadcasted live images 24 hours a day. Every screen in every city showed the same thing: the silent ships hanging above like enormous ornaments of light. Some anchors spoke softly as though afraid to break the spell. Others simply watched and let the pictures speak. Scientists tried to analyze everything: the movement, the shape, the reflection. But the technology was beyond understanding. The ships didn't appear to be made of anything known to science. They gave off no heat, no signal, no emissions. It was like they weren't even solid, just pure energy held in shape. Governments held emergency meetings again. Military radars confirmed the ships weren't attacking or sending harmful rays. They just hovered, stable and unmoving. No country claimed to be in control of them. No one could explain their purpose, and yet, people weren't afraid. In some strange way, humanity had grown used to the extraordinary. Maybe because there had been too many strange things already. Wars, disasters, discoveries, revolutions. Or maybe because deep down people sensed that these beings meant no harm. That evening, as the sun began to set, a new sight left everyone speechless. The ships began to glow from within. It wasn't bright or blinding, just soft, like the gentle light of lanterns. The glow shifted in rhythm, pulsing slowly, almost like breathing. Every ship glowed at the same time in perfect harmony. And then, from far above, the same low hum that people had heard weeks earlier returned. It was faint, but it filled the air. It wasn't music, but it had rhythm, as if the ships were singing to the planet. People began to hum along, across cities and villages. Crowds lifted their heads to the sky and joined the rhythm, their voices blending with the distant hum. For a few moments, earth and the sky seemed to move together, united by invisible sound. It was beautiful. Too beautiful for words. When the hum stopped, something strange happened. The glow of the ships faded, but not completely. Instead, small lights detached from them, tiny orbs that drifted downward through the atmosphere like snowflakes of light. They didn't fall fast. They floated, dancing gently as they came closer. People reached out their hands as if to catch them. The lights never touched the ground. They stopped midair, hovering just above rooftops and treetops. They flickered softly, then vanished one by one, leaving behind a faint shimmer in the air. No one was hurt. No damage, no noise, just beauty. Later, scientists would argue about what those lights were. Maybe data probes, maybe energy signatures, maybe communication. But for the people who witnessed it, it felt like a gift, a silent greeting, a sign that the visitors were aware of them. In one city, a teacher stood with her students in a playground, pointing up. "They came closer," she said quietly. "They wanted us to see them properly." No one disagreed. That night, the sky glowed with colors humans had never seen before. The ships reflected the Earth's light, creating gentle halos that stretched for miles. From space, astronauts on the International Space Station described it as the most peaceful sight in history. And perhaps the strangest part of all was how quickly people accepted it. The following week, life began to return to normal, or as normal as it could be under alien ships. People went to work. Markets reopened. Schools continued. The ships became part of the background, a permanent fixture above the clouds. Artists painted them. Filmmakers made short movies about them. Children used them in stories and drawings. Street vendors sold souvenirs shaped like the glowing orbs. Humanity had turned fear into fascination, anxiety into art. Some said the ships had changed something in the human mind, that maybe just knowing they were not alone had calmed the world. Arguments that once seemed important started to feel smaller. War slowed down. Even crime dropped in some cities. It was as if the quiet presence of those ships had reminded everyone of how small and precious life was. But not everyone trusted the peace. Some people believed the ships were observing, waiting for a reason to act. A few leaders ordered weapons to stay ready just in case. But even those who feared the worst couldn't deny the truth. The visitors had shown no violence, no demands, no attempt to rule or harm. They were just there, watching, listening, and in their silence, humanity saw itself more clearly. Weeks later, one ship made another move. The one hovering over the Pacific Ocean tilted slightly, as if adjusting its position. Then, for the first time, its surface opened. Not completely, just a section revealing an inner glow brighter than anything seen before. Telescopes everywhere turned toward it. Scientists held their breath. The light pulsed 3 times, the same pattern as the broadcast. Then it closed again. That was all. But it was enough to send chills through every observer. It was a reminder. They were still communicating. They still wanted to be understood. The pattern appeared again the next night. Then again the night after. Always the same 3 soft flashes. It was their way of saying, "We are here." By then, even the most skeptical had accepted the truth. Earth was not alone. But the strangest thing was not in the skies. It was inside people's hearts. Humanity had changed quietly, without realizing it. People had started speaking to one another with more patience. Strangers helped strangers. Families spent more time together. Artists, scientists, and dreamers began to share ideas freely. The world didn't become perfect. It never could. But it became gentler. All because something beyond understanding had appeared above them. And instead of bringing fear, it had brought calm. As the 3rd month of the ship's presence began, the world seemed to settle into a new rhythm, a rhythm of coexistence. The unknown no longer felt threatening. It felt like a mirror. People no longer looked at the ships with the question, "Why are they here?" Now they looked up and whispered something different. "Thank you for coming." And high above the earth, silent and shimmering, the ships continued to watch, patient, peaceful, eternal. The Galactic fleet had truly arrived, and mankind once again just smiled. Days turned into weeks. The ships still floated quietly in the sky, calm and motionless like stars that had forgotten to move. They didn't send more signals, no lights, no sounds. They just stayed there, silent, patient, and watching. At first, people kept waiting for something to happen. Every night, crowds gathered on rooftops, beaches, and open fields. They looked up, expecting another glow, another message, something that would explain why the visitors had come. But nothing came. Slowly, the excitement began to fade. Television channels that once talked about the ships every minute started covering other things again. Sports, politics, weather. Newspapers that used to print huge front-page photos of the glowing sky now moved the stories to smaller sections. The world had simply learned to live with the extraordinary, but even though life seemed to go back to normal, something inside people had changed. When they looked up at night, they didn't feel alone anymore. The ships were still there, reminding them that someone, something was out there, silently watching over the planet. It was like having a guardian in the sky, a presence that made people both curious and comforted at the same time. In big cities, the ships looked like frozen moons, reflecting lights from skyscrapers and rivers. In small villages, they shimmered above farms and forests, making nights glow softly. Some people started to treat the ships like symbols of hope. Artists painted them on walls. Musicians wrote songs about the silence. Even children began playing games about the sky friends. Humanity had accepted the visitors as part of its world, even though no one truly understood them. Then something strange began to happen. Not in the ships, but among people. The silence of the sky seemed to change human behavior in quiet ways. People argued less. Some wars that had been going on for years slowly came to an end. Nations started to share food and medicine more freely. It wasn't a miracle or a law, it was something invisible. Like the calm energy from above had reached human hearts. Psychologists called it the quiet effect. They said people were beginning to think more deeply about life, about kindness, about how small we all were compared to the vast sky. For a while, Earth felt softer, gentler, and yet curiosity never disappeared. Scientists still worked day and night to understand the ships. They used telescopes, satellites, radio frequencies, anything that might help them see what was inside. But every test ended the same way. No signals, no activity, no answers. The ships were like mirrors, reflecting everything but revealing nothing. Some scientists began to think the visitors were observing humanity, collecting data silently. Others believed they were simply resting, maybe recharging after a long journey. But the truth was, no one knew. The silence began to feel heavy. In some places, people grew impatient. Why won't they talk? They asked. Why did they come if they don't want to connect? Talk shows and online discussions filled with theories. Some said the ships had broken down. Others believed they had finished their mission and stayed only to watch. A few people even thought the ships were testing humanity, to see if humans could stay peaceful without constant communication. Whatever the reason, the silence lasted. Weeks passed, then months. The world began to forget how it felt when the first light appeared in the sky. The sense of magic that once united humanity started to fade like an old dream. People got busy again. Traffic jams returned. Arguments returned. The ordinary noise of life slowly replaced the stillness that had once covered the planet. But not everyone forgot. In quiet places, small groups of people continued to meet every evening to watch the sky. They sat together without talking much, just looking, listening, hoping. They called themselves the listeners. One night in a desert far from any city, a group of listeners gathered around a campfire. The sky above them was so clear that the ships looked like bright coins against the stars. No one spoke for hours. Then an old man said softly, "Maybe they've already spoken. Maybe the silence is the message." The others didn't laugh. They just nodded. Maybe he was right. Because as time went on, people began to notice something new in that silence. It was peaceful. It was patient. It wasn't empty. It was full of meaning. It felt like the visitors were teaching humanity something without words, how to listen. Even animals seemed calmer. Fishermen near the coast said dolphins swam closer to shore than usual. Birds built nests near the glowing reflections of the ships. It was as if the entire earth had entered a quiet conversation with the unknown. But not everyone liked the quiet. In some powerful countries, leaders started to worry. What if they are studying us? What if they are waiting to attack? They asked their advisors. They began to plan secret missions, sending drones, building rockets, trying to get closer to the ships. None of them succeeded. Every time a drone approached one of the ships, it would simply stop working. No explosion, no warning. It would just shut down completely, like the ships had turned off the power around them. That only deepened the mystery. Eventually, the leaders stopped trying. It was pointless to fight something that didn't want to fight back, so the world settled once again into quiet observation. Years might have passed that way, had it not been for a small event that changed everything again. One evening, as the sun set over the Pacific, the largest ship moved for the first time in months. It wasn't much, just a slow rotation, a tilt, like a sleeping creature stretching after a long rest. The movement was small, but enough to make the ocean waves ripple differently. Satellites captured it instantly. Within minutes, the world was watching. People left their homes, standing under the open sky again, hearts pounding. Was it finally time? But the ship didn't come closer. It didn't shine brighter. It simply turned slightly, revealing a reflection that caught the sunlight and sent it down to Earth. For a few minutes, the entire ocean looked golden. And then, as the light faded, something strange happened. In that glow, people on islands and along coasts said they saw shapes, not of machines, but of patterns, circles within circles moving softly within the light. It wasn't a message, not exactly. It was more like art, like a dance made of light and silence. And just as quickly as it came, it was gone. After that night, the ships never moved again. They returned to their stillness, but now people felt something different when they looked at them. Not frustration, not confusion, but respect. It became clear that the visitors weren't ignoring humanity. They were communicating in their own way, Slowly, carefully, through silence, through patience, through presence. The silence between worlds was no longer empty. It was a space for learning. The ships had taught humanity something that no book, no war, no discovery ever could: how to wait without fear, and humanity had changed because of it. People started noticing the beauty of ordinary things again: the color of the sky, the sound of rain, the feeling of holding someone's hand. The silence made life feel larger, more meaningful. It was as if the ships had pressed a pause button on history, giving the planet time to breathe, to think, to heal. By now, children born after the arrival of the fleet had grown up never knowing a world without them. To them, the silver ships were just part of the sky, as normal as the moon. When teachers told them stories of the first appearance, of how the world once feared the unknown, they laughed and shook their heads. Why would anyone be scared of something that never hurt us? They asked. No one had a clear answer. Because maybe that was the point. Maybe the greatest lesson the visitors had given was this: that peace doesn't always arrive with noise or words or power. Sometimes it arrives quietly, and it stays that way. The silence between worlds was not a distance anymore. It had become a bridge, a connection built not with sound but with understanding. And though the visitors never spoke again, the people of Earth had learned to listen to more than just their voices. They had learned to listen to themselves. The Galactic fleet remained above, calm and unchanging, their soft glow blending with the stars. The world beneath them carried on, living, growing, and smiling, under the quietest friendship the universe had ever known. And in that silence, there was peace. For many years, the ship stayed still above the Earth, calm and silent, shining softly like a second set of stars. People had grown used to them being there. They were no longer something strange or frightening. They were simply part of the sky. Then one day something changed. It started quietly. A few scientists noticed small movements on their screens, tiny shifts in the ship's positions, almost too small to believe. They thought it was a mistake at first, maybe a glitch in the system, but then more stations confirmed the same readings. The ships were moving. Not fast, not in any dangerous way, but slowly, deliberately. The news spread quickly. Within hours, the world knew. The Galactic fleet, silent for so many years, was finally doing something. People gathered in parks, on rooftops, at beaches, the same way they had years ago when the ships first arrived. Old memories came back. Some people were excited, others nervous. Children pointed at the sky with wonder. The elderly watched quietly with a mix of joy and sadness in their eyes. No one knew what was going to happen next. For days, the movement continued, slow and graceful, like the ships were rearranging themselves into a new pattern. Scientists called it a realignment. They said the formation was changing shape, forming perfect circles that expanded outward, one after another, like ripples in water. It was beautiful. Each night, the ships glowed brighter than before, and the sky looked like it was filled with thousands of floating lanterns. The light reflected on the oceans, making them shimmer like silver. Even in cities filled with tall buildings and bright lights, people could still see the glow above. Something was different this time. The air felt alive, like it carried a soft vibration. People said they could feel it in their chests. A faint hum, warm and deep, almost like a heartbeat. And then, one morning, it stopped. The ships froze in perfect formation, silent again. The hum faded. The light softened. It was as if the entire fleet was waiting for something. People waited too. For hours, for days, nothing happened. The world held its breath. Scientists sent messages into the sky again, hoping for a reply. Radio signals, laser pulses, mathematical codes. But no answer came. Then, just as everyone began to think the moment had passed, the light changed. One of the ships, the largest one, began to glow brighter than all the others. Slowly, a beam of soft light reached down through the clouds, touching the Earth. It wasn't blinding or sharp. It was gentle, almost like sunlight through water. Where it touched, something beautiful happened. The ground shimmered faintly, not with fire or heat, but with color. Blues, greens, golds, dancing like reflections on water. It spread outward, covering mountains, rivers, and forests in a soft glow. No one was afraid. The light felt peaceful, calm. It didn't burn or destroy anything. Plants, animals, people, everything stayed the same, just touched by that strange and wonderful radiance. And then the message came, not through sound, not through words, but through feeling. People all over the world described the same thing. It was like a thought, gentle and clear, appearing in their minds all at once. No voice, no language, and just understanding. The message was simple. Thank you. It wasn't long, but it was enough to fill every heart on Earth. People began to cry, not from fear, but from the deep emotion of it. They felt gratitude, peace, and a strange sense of connection, as if every person, every living thing was part of something much larger. After the message, the light began to fade. The ship stayed bright for a few more minutes, then slowly dimmed until only their outlines were visible. The giant formation in the sky shifted again, this time forming something new, a symbol no one had ever seen before. It looked like a spiral, slowly turning, glowing softly in silver and blue. It wasn't random. It had meaning, though no one could explain it. Scientists said it represented unity, movement, or maybe a journey. Others thought it was a farewell, a promise that the visitors would return one day. As the days passed, small changes began to appear on Earth. Not dramatic, but gentle, like the planet itself had been touched by kindness. Crops grew better in some places. The air felt cleaner. Even the weather seemed calmer for a while. People started calling it the blessing. No one could prove what caused it, but everyone could feel it. The world had become quieter, softer, more alive. It was as if the visitors had left a little part of themselves behind. But something else was happening too. The ships, one by one, began to rise higher. At first it was slow, so slow that people barely noticed. But after a few weeks, their positions were clearly changing. They were drifting upward toward the stars. Scientists measured the movement carefully. The fleet was leaving Earth's orbit. This time people understood what it meant. The Galactic fleet was preparing to go home. The world reacted differently than it had years ago. There was no panic, no confusion, only quiet acceptance. People around the world began holding gatherings, not protests or ceremonies of fear, but of gratitude. In one city, thousands of people stood in silence with candles facing the sky. In another, children released lanterns that floated up into the night like tiny reflections of the ships above. Some people prayed, some sang softly, some just stood quietly holding hands. It didn't matter who they were or where they came from. Everyone felt the same emotion, love. The visitors had never spoken a single word, yet they had taught humanity more than any voice ever could. They had shown that connection didn't always need sound, and peace didn't need power. The departure was slow. It took weeks for the fleet to move fully beyond the sky's edge. But even as they drifted farther away, they still glowed. Tiny dots of light fading slowly but never completely gone. Every evening people gathered to watch. They wanted to see the last light disappear, even though it made their hearts heavy. Some whispered to the sky saying thank you, goodbye, or simply, we'll remember. And somehow it felt like the ships could hear. One night, something beautiful happened. The fleet, almost invisible by now, suddenly brightened one last time. The lights formed a wide arc across the stars, not random, but in a perfect, gentle curve. It looked like a smile. People gasped, then smiled too through their tears. It was the same way the story had begun, with humanity smiling at the unknown. That light stayed for a few minutes, shimmering softly like a promise. Then one by one the ships faded from sight until the sky returned to normal, quiet, vast, and full of stars. But it didn't feel empty, because even though the ships were gone, their presence remained. People could still feel it, in the way they treated one another, in the way they looked at the sky, in the way they had learned to listen instead of fear. Life went on. Days turned into months. Seasons changed. The world began to rebuild and grow again, stronger than before. Technology advanced, but with more care. Nations cooperated instead of competing. And sometimes, late at night, when the world was silent, people swore they could still see faint flickering lights far away, like distant stars blinking just a little differently. Maybe it was just imagination, or maybe the visitors were still out there watching. No one really knew, but deep inside everyone carried the same quiet hope, that one day the Galactic fleet might return. Not because humanity needed saving, but because they wanted to share how much they had grown. Because this time, when the skylights appeared again, the world would be ready. Not afraid, not uncertain, just smiling, and maybe that was what the visitors had wanted all along. Not to rule, not to control, but to teach humanity how to live peacefully, how to look up at the stars and see not danger, but possibility. The ships had left, but they had taken nothing with them. Instead, they had given something priceless, a new way of seeing the universe. And so, long after they were gone, their legacy lived on, not in machines or monuments, but in the hearts of people who had once looked up and smiled at the unknown. Because when the Galactic fleet arrived, the world changed, and when it left, the world was ready to take its own first small steps into the stars. Would you like me to now merge parts 1 to 6 into one continuous script, around 9,000 words total, so it flows smoothly like a cinematic narration for YouTube storytelling? Years had passed since the day the ships came. The world had changed, not through war or disaster, but through something quieter, understanding. The silver shapes still hung high above the earth, but people no longer looked at them with the same wide eyes as before. They had become part of life, a constant presence in the sky. Children born after the arrival never knew a world without them. To them, the Galactic fleet was just another part of the sky. Not scary, not mysterious, just there, like the moon, like the stars. But for the older generations, those who had witnessed the first lights, the memory never faded. They still remembered the day the world stopped to look upward, the day humanity felt truly united for the first time. And then, one quiet morning, everything changed again. It was early. The sun had barely risen. In a small town near the sea, a fisherman was preparing his nets when he noticed something strange. The water, usually calm at dawn, shimmered like glass. He looked up and saw the reflection of the ships moving. At first he thought it was his imagination. The ships hadn't moved in years, but as he watched, he realized it wasn't an illusion. The lights were shifting, very slowly but definitely moving. Within hours, people across the world saw it too. The fleet that had been still for so long was now rotating, aligning itself in perfect formation. News channels came alive again, showing the same view from every corner of the planet. Hundreds of ships glowing softly against the morning sky. No one panicked this time. Instead, a strange sadness spread through the world. Deep down, people knew what it meant. The visitors were leaving. Crowds gathered in open fields, beaches, and city streets. The silence felt heavier than ever. For the first time, humans didn't want the sky to change. They wanted the ships to stay. People didn't shout or cry. They just watched. The same way they had watched when the ships arrived. Calm, silent, and full of feeling. And then it happened. The ships began to rise. Not fast, not suddenly. They lifted like feathers, drifting upward as if the air itself was carrying them. Their silver glow turned brighter as they climbed higher, reflecting the sunlight in colors no one had ever seen before. The hum returned, soft, deep, beautiful. It wasn't loud enough to hurt. It was gentle, almost like a farewell song. The rhythm was familiar, the same pattern as the broadcast from years ago. 3 beats, then 5, then 8. This time everyone understood. It wasn't just numbers. It was a message, a goodbye. Tears fell freely, but they weren't sad tears. It was the kind of emotion people felt when saying goodbye to something precious, something that had made them better. As the ships rose higher, the glow around them spread, painting the sky in silver and gold. The clouds themselves seemed to shimmer. Even animals stopped what they were doing. Birds hovered mid-flight, whales surfaced. Dogs looked upward quietly. The entire planet was watching. Then something unexpected happened. The ships began to form a massive shape in the sky, not random but precise. A giant circle surrounded by smaller ones, just like the pattern of planets around a sun. For a moment it looked like they were showing humanity something, a reflection of their own world, or maybe a reminder of connection between all living things. After a few minutes, the formation started to fade. One by one, the ships turned away, glowing brighter until their forms dissolved into points of light. Then, just as they had appeared years ago, they were gone. No explosion. No noise, no trace. The skies were empty again. At first, the world felt silent in a way it hadn't felt in years. People looked up at the blank sky expecting the lights to return, but they never did. For the first time in a long time, there were only clouds and stars. Nothing more. And yet, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. Over the next few days, the world tried to understand what had happened. Scientists searched for any sign of the ships, scanning every corner of the sky. Governments sent satellites into orbit. But there was nothing. No radiation, no debris, no trace of where they went. They had simply vanished. Some said the visitors had gone back to their home. Others believed they had traveled to another world, maybe another civilization. A few thought they were still nearby, just invisible, watching from somewhere humanity couldn't see. But most people didn't need an answer. They felt that whatever the visitors came to do, it was complete. Humanity had been changed forever, not through technology or force, but through awareness. People had learned to be calm, to look at each other differently, to value peace in a way they never had before. In the months that followed, many new projects began around the world, not military ones, but projects of learning and unity. Scientists shared information freely across borders. Artists created new forms of music inspired by the broadcast. Writers wrote stories about hope and discovery instead of fear. Even schools began teaching about the age of the visitors, not as a story of aliens, but as a story of humanity, the time when people learned to listen to the universe and to themselves. And maybe the most beautiful part was that the change stayed. Years later, when people spoke of those days, they didn't talk about the technology or the mystery. They talked about how the world had felt, peaceful, connected, alive. In a small town, that same fisherman who had first seen the ships move would tell his grandchildren the story every night. They would sit near the water, eyes wide, listening as he described the lights, the hum, and the feeling in the air when the ship said goodbye. "Were you scared?" they would ask. He would smile and shake his head. "No," he'd say softly. "For the first time, I wasn't scared at all. I just felt proud." "Proud of what?" they'd ask. "Proud that we smiled back," he'd answer. And that was the truth. When the Galactic fleet arrived, humanity had not panicked or attacked. It had simply looked up, curious and calm. When the fleet left, humanity did not cry or beg. It simply smiled again, the same way it had in the beginning. Because maybe that was what the visitors had wanted to see all along. Not how strong or smart humans were, but how gentle they could be. Maybe that was the real test, and maybe, just maybe, somewhere out there in the endless dark, the visitors smiled too. Years later, people would still tell the story of the day the sky lit up and the ships came, not as a tale of invasion, but as a story of peace. A story that said we are not alone, and maybe we never were. Because even after they were gone, sometimes on quiet nights, when the wind was still and the stars shone brighter than usual, people swore they could hear something faint in the air. A soft hum, like the memory of that old broadcast. 3 beats, 5, 8. And in those moments, people would look up, smile gently, and whisper the same words across generations. They came in peace, and we answered the same way. For humanity, that was enough. The Galactic fleet had come and gone, but what they left behind was far greater than ships or lights. They left behind calm. They left behind kindness. They left behind a world that had finally learned how to smile, not out of pride, not out of ignorance, but out of understanding. Because in the end, the message was never about them, it was about us. The stars above were quiet again, but the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of meaning. And somewhere in that vast silence, perhaps carried by invisible waves across galaxies, a single truth remained. That when the Galactic fleet arrived, mankind didn't run, didn't fight, didn't hide. Mankind just smiled.